would you tell us your experiences of what it's like to be a black person in the UK generally?
For me, being mixed race, my mum's from Trinidad. I've had a fair share of kind of a mixed bag of experiences of being like black in the UK. I would say some of my experiences have been a bit more negative at school. I think where some people haven't maybe understood much about the black history and things like the slave trade, even like apartheid or things like that. And I think sometimes some comments which could be aimed about like things that we use for our hair or different foods that we might eat can sometimes come across quite hurtful without people knowing. I think sometimes, especially younger people, they might not be educated as much, so they might not know like what they're saying has a impact on me or other people who are black. And I think sometimes that's been a bit of a struggle at times. But I think on the whole, a lot of people have started to become more understanding about black people. And if I think about different cultures, because I think it's about being culturally more aware of people's differences, then we can accept them more. But yeah, that's where I'll start at.
That's gorgeous. Thanks very much.
I really wanted to be a ballet dancer when I was a little girl, and I was unable to go to ballet school because they didn't accept anybody who was black. So my growing up was quite different from Sally's, because I was always questioned, like, how come you don't straighten your hair? How come your hair isn't long? Can we touch it? And I actually felt like an exotic animal, because an exotic animal you have to touch and just do special things with it. And I felt people that I bumped into as a child wanted to touch me all the time, as though I was like something really different. So that's my first experience of being black.
Julie, you told me the story of how you'd gone along to the ballet class. Would you be kind enough to share that again?
Well, it was quite painful, really, because I only found this story before my mum passed away. But she had a very good, in fact, I wrote a poem about it. But she told me that she had a very good friend who ran this school for ballet. And she told them about myself and my twin sister. And the woman says to my mum, "Oh, you must have the children come, you must have them come to the class." So she came home and she said to me, "We've got you in the school and we're going this weekend on to take you." And when she took us, we had to go up these very high stairs. And suddenly she heard this banging, the running towards her going, and the arms waving, going, "Stop, stop, stop." And my mum said, "Why?" And she said, "You never told me children were black." So my mum kissed us and walked us out of the school. But that, even now it's painful for me to talk about that, because even white mothers who foster black children, they still get racism.
Thank you for sharing it again. I just can't imagine what it's like to be going to a ballet class and be turned away before you even get to the door. It's nice to think that things may be a bit easier since then for younger people, but they certainly aren't easy yet. And I'm wondering if you have any other special anecdotes, stories that bring alive to us the reality of unconscious bias.
Yeah. I think one that really jumps out to me was at high school in around year 9, I think. And I was just in like a normal class, and there was a group of boys and they came up to me and said, "Why is your hair so greasy?" Because I had all my products in it, my nice Caribbean products. And I was kind of just like shocked. And then they were, do you know what I mean, really taunting me and looking at my hair as if it was something different. And I would still always get, say, in another class, usually chemistry, I'd always get people saying, "Can I touch your hair? Can I touch it?" A bit like what Julie said. And you get made to feel a bit of an outsider. And I think it can make you feel a bit just odd, because it's like, why does it matter that my hair looks any different? And I don't mind if it's compliments, but when people kind of said, can I touch it? And then there was this one occasion which was awful. I was walking to PA and this group of boys tried to throw like food in my hair, saying it was greasy and awful, and why did I use so many products? Did I not wash it every night? And did I not look after it? And that really kind of brought me down a peg or two, I thought, because I just couldn't understand why people would maybe judge me or want to treat me differently just because of my hair. And I think as well, like groups of girls at times, they would be a bit like, if I had my hair braided, they wouldn't really understand what I was doing. And if it looked any different to what theirs did, they would completely just kind of look and frown upon it. And I think that's really like weird, especially for the 21st century, that people can still kind of treat you as an outsider just because your hair's different and you use lots of different products. And I think that can really knock someone's confidence, because the hair's something that's really important. And for someone to say things or try and throw food in your hair, I remember just coming home and crying to my dad, and he couldn't do much but just support me and tell me that there's nothing wrong with my hair. And it really made me question if there was anything wrong. But yeah.
Hard on your confidence, isn't it? That sort of thing. And
Mm.
Julie, you've written about this in your poetry, haven't you? This sort of experience.
Yeah, I mean, for me as a teenager, the race culture used to come to life. White people were always questioning my identity when it came to my blackness, even saying that they wouldn't let their children marry a black person. I was told by the white side of my family that I was too black to mix with my cousin, and she was mixed race. And they used to say to me was, why do you class yourself as black when you're mixed race? Do you hate your white mother? They were so wrong. I embraced my blackness. My biological mother supported me 100%. She loved my African dresses and always encouraged me to wear them and African braid. But when I was with my foster mother, she wouldn't accept my blackness. And one day when I was growing up, I was posted to Devon on holiday, and she said, and there's one thing you mustn't bring with you, and that's an African dress. Anyway, I did bring it. But before she died, I expressed my feelings to her, and she said to me, you are my English rose. And I replied, your English black rose. And she smiled in a loving way. And that poem in my book, The English Rose, that was dedicated to her, because at the very end of her life, she accepted me for who I wanted to be.
Wanting to know what your experiences are specifically in the church, particularly perhaps the Church of England, as a black person coming in or being part probably of a majority white congregation.
Mm.
Let's start with you, please, Julie, because you've been a member of St. James and Emmanuel longer, and probably of other churches before.
I was brought up in the Methodist Church in Levenshulme, and I did not personally experience any kind of racism, but I remember distinctly when the pastor spoke about black people in Africa starving, living in huts. It made me feel very uncomfortable, because that was always the theme, and it seemed like people were looking at me when they were talking about African people, and I just felt it just upset me inside for them constantly say that Africa is poor and need money and need food. And I couldn't understand. And that's the one thing as a grown up that I've taken with me, and it stayed with me, is that continuous theme, starvation and living in huts like savages. That's what they used to say to me in the church sermons as a child.
And that
I came there is because they are inclusive and they care about every ethnic minority and the LGBT community, and they think of everybody in that church as an equal. And that's why I'm part of the church.
Thank you very much. That's encouraging. Sally?
Well, growing up, I grew up going to the church called St Bartholomew's in Wimsler, which is Church of England, and I was part of the youth group there from a young age. I think from a baby, I would go along with my dad because he would help out there. And I must admit, I didn't really have many problems. I had an older brother as well, and he is fully black, and I must admit, we never really had any problems, really. I think people were really accepting because my heritage and ethnicity is that my dad is white and I've mainly lived with him. So like Julie, I've embraced a lot of my white culture because I'm really proud of where my dad comes from and his family. So I'm really proud of that. So for me, there wasn't too many problems. I felt quite accepted. And I think the youth leaders there, they were both around in their 40s, and one of them, she was half Indian, and we had quite a mixed and diverse group of people. So I think that really helped us in a way, and I think I was very lucky to be part of kind of from an infant right through until I stopped going around 11, to have like youth leaders who really kind of knew what to say, and they were just very compassionate and loving, and one of them was my godmother. So she would understand where I was coming from. So there would never be any comments kind of like what Julie's experienced to do with Africa and people being savages or the slave trade, or there was never kind of any negativity towards me and my brother. We actually felt really included. And I think that was just down to as well, actually, the youth team there just being really accepting and loving and basing it more around helping young people, encouraging them and sharing the teachings of the Bible. I think they really focused on that. So there wasn't really an issue over my race. And I think that really helped me to feel belonging and a part of the group. And I think that really helped. But I must admit, like, as I've got older, and before St. James and Emmanuel, I haven't been fully at a Church of England church. I must admit, at St. James and Emmanuel, I felt really accepted from the moment I was there. But the only thing is, I'd say, is it can be a bit sometimes nerve-wracking when there's not many other black people, I think, or not many people from that culture. Because then if you want to share kind of things maybe you think white people might not understand or might not talk about as openly, it can be quite difficult in that kind of situation. And I think sometimes that can be a bit of a problem. Even you just feel a bit nervous maybe walking into a group of all white people, especially sometimes, not to offend anyone, but say if they're old and maybe an older generation, they might be less understanding of things like the Windrush generation, or like Julie says, clothing, I think as well, that can be a massive thing. But I've really accepted my white ethnicity background. So growing up, I haven't had too many problems, but I do think that especially at St. James and Emmanuel, they try and combat that by being really inclusive. And I've never felt kind of by anyone in the actual leadership team, I've never felt kind of excluded or left out because of my background. I think it can just be maybe a bit nerve-wracking and a bit, you always feel like there's not many kind of black people, and also as like in the actual ministry team, there's not many black people as well. And I think sometimes that can make you wonder, you know, are there less black vicars, or are they just not at this particular parish? Because at all the parishes, because we used to go to one in Longsight every once in a while, and there would be more kind of, I think in the inner city, there'd be more black vicars. But I think sometimes that can be a bit of a talking point, because you kind of wonder, why are there so many white vicars maybe?
That's actually really quite helpful, and it gets us into our next question too, in the sense that what will make it easier for the church to be truly welcoming, truly inclusive, and for racism to really die. And Unconscious Bias, that our diocese is working on helping folk understand it. But you've touched on the possibility that more black people in leadership would be useful.
Yeah, definitely.
And there is a sort of critical mass where at least a few people who are black in the congregation helps you to come and belong to it if you are black. It might be helpful to have more black people in leadership, various roles. That's a good one. Have you any other suggestions as to how the Church of England particularly can include and make it easier for black people to take their full part along with the rest of God's family?
I think the best thing for them to do is to ask black people to be part of a higher part of the church. They want people to volunteer. Sometimes a black person can be shy or feel like she didn't have the confidence. So I think they should request for black people to become part of church, to be more than just part of the congregation. And I don't mean like broadcast it through everyone, but just go to that individual and say, oh, you've been coming to our church for a long time. How would you like, because that's what happened to me. Somebody came to me and said, you know, we need godly faith teachers. How do you like to be? When I thought, oh, I never thought of it. So I think the church has got to be able to go out there, and as they go out preaching outside the church about God, they need to be in the church and getting people of all nationalities, talking about Asians, because we have Asian people come, we have some Chinese come, and it's very important if they just become like a ward. That would be good. If I have never seen anybody in church as a black person or a minister that is doing something that is like a lay person or one of the wards. I've never seen it ever in my whole life, and I know they don't have one in Emmanuel or Saint's.
Yeah. No,
and I think it's important for the church to approach people that are coming to the church every week. Do that.
Yeah. And there is a need to identify the need and go out and find people that God is calling into those roles. The warden's team is hugely important. They're behind the chairs, so to speak, watching and helping, and they lead. And we need black people to be there as well as in the ordained ministry, don't we? Mm.
Yeah.
But
Sally,
if you don't ask, they won't come.
Correct.
I think I agree with Julie. I think it's quite a visual thing. I think when you see more black people in leadership roles, or even of other ethnicities like BAME, like people who are like Indian, Chinese, I think that really helps you then, because it's like all well and good seeing everything, the signs of inclusivity. I think you actually need demonstrations which help you feel more belonging, and I think that really helps everyone, and especially I suppose as young children, I think, who come in, I think if they see that the integration, that can really help them as well. So I think that's something that's really important. But yeah, I don't know, I think it's definitely seeing a wider variety of ethnicities in leadership roles, or maybe even doing certain discussions or joining certain groups, I think as well, that would help to maybe start, because me and Julie said maybe to start more conversations up, like online forums, or where people, say if they're new to the church as well, they could share their experiences of being black and mixed race, because then I think that would also help people be able to open up and feel more apart and more connected to one another. Because I think when you share your story, it really helps you feel connected to someone else, and then you can build up from that. So maybe a safe place where people who are new, or who might be, say, like Chinese, black, mixed race, they could come together and share some of their experiences. I think that would really help, and also encourage people then to maybe to join leadership roles, because they feel more accepted and belonging, rather than, like Julie says, people just to come and then not stay because of whatever reason. I think that would really help.
You're teasing something out there that's valuable as well, because I think there's a culture, even in St. James and Emmanuel, of expecting people to volunteer. And actually, unless you go to people and invite them to volunteer, they don't always realize they want it. Sally, you said something interesting before that you might want to expand a bit more. You said sometimes if you're going into an all-white gathering, a social gathering, you watch what you say. It's something about that you don't say things that are immediate to your mind or that you're thinking of because you think this might be only relevant to my culture or my blackness or something. Tell me what that means.
I think because obviously growing up mixed race, you've got a mixture of two cultures which both have different heritages. I think, say if you meet someone who's only white or you're in a room full of only white people, then you might struggle. Like if I was in a group of only white people and there was dueling and maybe we were trying to discuss something to do with African clothing or the food we eat, like plantain or something like that, I think we might be more reluctant because it might makes it more difficult maybe for us to share openly because you might think, oh, they might not know what it is, they might think that's quite odd. I think it comes down to a lot, I suppose, older people maybe don't know as much about it as maybe younger generations, only because now there's constant news and there's kind of the constant message that's being shared about Black Lives Matter. So yeah, I think sometimes that can be a bit difficult at times if you walk into a group, you know, you feel a bit culturally isolated. And I think that was the same. I had that a bit at school because at school it was literally around 96% white. There's only about one other boy in my year who was black. And even at times, if he had his hairstyle differently, people would just constantly try and make fun of that. Or if he was going on holiday to Jamaica, you know, people would say things like, you know, watch you don't get any diseases, you know, anything. They just really wouldn't understand. And I think it's still such a common thing. So I think it's definitely about not just bringing more Black people into the church and getting them into leadership roles. I think it's about maybe trying to get people to discuss openly, like in a wide group of people, so not only Black people but also white people, and that way you can actually see the integration. And when you can see the integration happening, I think it makes you feel a lot more included.
As Sally said, when I was Sally, I feel I can say anything to her. I can say, oh, you know, like your hair, you can use this look. But when I'm with my white friends, I do tend to stop. I only say certain things with around white people, and I don't always talk about Black subjects or things that I'm concerned about. I do it most with my Black friends because a lot of times when you're with a black group of people and you start talking about black issues, they jump up and go, oh, well, we already know that. And they always stop you in your tracks and they always make some other excuse. And then when you do tell them, they don't want to listen. But what I find with St. James's and Emmanuel is that every so often we used to have these bring food and let's get together. And I brought some plantain. I went to Moss and I brought some sweet sweet dumplings and plantains, and they absolutely loved it. So I think one of the ways the church can go is have an international day where the congregation brings one item from the country of origin. And you don't have to do it every month, but every so often bring something, and then bring something that somebody doesn't know, and then you can explain. And this way get to taste the food, and they also get to learn something, because that's what it's about. We're all God's children in the end.
Yeah.
But I think with white people, they're so used to having things their way. Because, for instance, if you have an African name, they just give, my son's called Joe, and white people call him Joe. And one day, I got a phone call saying, I need to speak to Joe. And I said, oh, there's nobody in this house is called that name. And then I told my son, he says, Mum, people don't want to call me by my African name. They want to give me another name. So white people need to learn and practice saying the actual African name, because what I did, there was this girl called Noja, and she's English, but she's Muslim and she has a different name. And I wrote her name down, and every day at home I practiced her name because I wanted to make sure I used it. And I think that's what English people need to be told at church. Don't make up somebody's name. Learn their real name because it means something to them.
Definitely.
That's a really helpful point. It's such a simple but such a telling point, that. Thank you.